It's strange, looking back, how ordinary the day felt at first. I woke up to the pale sunlight sneaking through the thin curtains in my room, painting weak little stripes across the floor. The air was still cool from the night before, and I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan above me. Nothing about that morning screamed, "This will be the day your life changes." No, it was just normal that I remember dragging myself out of bed, feet hitting the cold floor, and shuffling to the kitchen. The smell of coffee was already drifting through the house. That's how it always was with my dad. He wasn't the type to say much first thing in the morning, but he made sure the coffee pot was on before I even thought about waking up. I guess in his own quiet way, that was his version of good morning. Our family dynamic. Well, let's just say it wasn't the picture-perfect kind you see in movies. My dad and I weren't the type to hug or throw "I love yous" around casually, but there was a rhythm to it, a kind of silent understanding. He provided, he showed up, and I existed in that space he created. It wasn't warm and fuzzy, but it was steady. And for a long time, I thought steady was enough that I can still hear the sounds of that morning. The clink of his spoon against the coffee mug. The squeak of the old fridge door when I opened it to grab milk. Even the sound of the neighbor's dog, barking in the distance, annoying as ever. Life was just ordinary. And I was grateful for ordinary, because ordinary meant safe. That if you had asked me then to describe my relationship with my dad, I probably would have said something simple. Like he's just there. Not in a bad way, not in an overwhelming way, just a solid presence. He had this quiet authority about him. Not intimidating, exactly, but the kind of weight that made you straighten up when he walked into the room. That morning, I didn't sense anything unusual. He glanced at me as I walked into the kitchen, gave me the usual nod, and went back to his paper. That was our language: nods, half smiles, and the occasional, "Eat something." I thought I knew what to expect from him. I thought I knew who he was. Funny how life loves to pull the rug out from under you when you least expect it. That I wish I could say I was good at hiding it. That I managed to slip through the day, pretending nothing was wrong, like some kind of actor in a bad play. But bruises have a way of telling on you, especially when they bloom right across your face. I remember staring at myself in the mirror that morning, fingertips grazing the swollen skin under my eye. The purplish color had deepened overnight, spreading like spilled ink across my cheekbone. My first thought wasn't even about the pain, it was about the shame. How do I explain this? What excuse sounds believable? Do I lie? Or do I say nothing and hope nobody asks? I dabbed at it with a cold spoon I'd pulled from the freezer, hoping the swelling would go down. The metal bit into my skin, but all it did was remind me of how tender it was. I tried covering it with makeup, not that I was any good at it. My hand shook as I pressed concealer into the bruise, and no matter how much I blended, the shadow bled through. When I walked back into the kitchen, I kept my head down. I pulled my hair forward, let it fall across my face like a curtain. It felt ridiculous, but it was all I had. Maybe if I didn't make eye contact, maybe if I just kept moving, he wouldn't notice. But here's the thing. You can hide a lot of things in life. Your feelings, your words, even your failures. But pain has a way of slipping through the cracks. My dad wasn't stupid. He noticed. The funny part is, I thought I was prepared for his reaction. Maybe he'd get angry. Maybe he'd ask who did this. Maybe he'd scold me for not standing up for myself. I played out a dozen scenarios in my head, every single one louder than the last. But none of those scenes matched what actually happened later. In those moments before he saw it. Though, I couldn't stop the rush of questions in my head. Would he care? Would he just brush it off? Would he look at me differently now? And beneath all of that was this quiet, ugly thought I didn't want to admit. Do I even deserve for him to care? That thought stung more than the bruise itself. That I don't think I'll ever forget the exact second it happened. The sound of the front door creaking open, his heavy footsteps crossing the living room, the faint scrape of his boots against the tile. I was sitting at the edge of the couch, hands clenched in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. I thought maybe if I just sat still enough, quiet enough, the whole thing would somehow disappear. But then, he looked at me. It wasn't a long stare, not at first. Just a glance, casual, like the way you'd look at someone while passing by. Except his eyes froze when they landed on me. I felt my throat tighten, like I was caught doing something wrong. My face was still wet, streaked with tears I hadn't managed to wipe away. My hair had slipped to the side, exposing the bruise in all its ugly truth. Time slowed in that way people always talk about, but you never quite believe until it happens. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the hum of the refrigerator. In the background, my chest felt like it was caving in, waiting, desperately, for his reaction, and in that stretched-out silence, 1,000 thoughts sprinted through my head. He's going to ask me who did this. He's going to be furious. He'll yell, maybe storm out, maybe grab his car keys and go find the person responsible. I braced myself for it. The explosion, the storm, the fire, but it never came. He just stared, his expression unreadable, eyes heavy, mouth pressed into a thin line. No questions, no anger, not even a sigh, just this silence that felt louder than anything I'd ever heard. And then he turned. He walked past me, past the kitchen, and out the door. That was it. The sound of the door shutting behind him echoed through the house, sharp and final. And I sat there, motionless, tears drying on my face, staring at the spot where he had been. I couldn't even process it. My brain kept looping. Wait, that's it. He saw me. He saw this. And he left. I wanted to scream after him, to demand answers. But my voice wouldn't come. It was like the weight of his silence had stolen the words from my throat. All I had left was this hollow, gut-wrenching ache that settled deeper with every passing second. That was the moment the bruise stopped hurting as much as the silence did. When the door clicked shut behind him, the house became unbearable. It wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Every creak of the walls, every distant sound from outside, only made the emptiness louder. I sat there, frozen, staring at the spot where he had stood just moments before, trying to make sense of it. 30 minutes isn't long in the grand scheme of things. But in that half hour, it felt like I lived an entire lifetime of questions. Did he not care? Was I really that unimportant to him? Or was this his way of telling me to figure it out on my own? Each thought landed like a punch to the chest, sharper than the bruise under my eye. I wanted to believe there was a reason, that maybe he was processing, maybe he needed a moment to collect himself before coming back to me. But the darker part of my mind whispered something else. Maybe he walked away because I wasn't worth the fight. And that broke something inside me. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, head buried in my hands. My tears had dried by then, leaving behind that tight, itchy feeling on my skin. I rubbed at my face, as if smearing away the evidence of both the bruise. And the crying would undo the reality I was stuck in. That silence, it dragged me back to memories I hadn't thought about in years. Like the time I fell off my bike when I was 7, knees scraped open, crying on the pavement. My dad had rushed over, scooped me up, and carried me home. I remember how steady his hands felt on my shoulders as he patched me up, the way his voice, gruff but gentle, had calmed me down. I believed then, with the certainty only a child can have, that nothing could hurt me as long as he was around. Or the night I woke up from a nightmare, convinced there was something under my bed. I still remember the sound of his footsteps as he came down the hall, flashlight in hand, checking every corner of my room. "See," he'd said, shining the light under the bed. "Nothing here. You're safe." And I believed him. But sitting there in that living room, 30 minutes dragging on like 30 years, all those memories twisted into something else. If he could protect me then, why couldn't he protect me now? If he could carry me when I was bleeding from scraped knees, why did he leave me bleeding on the inside today? I checked the clock at least 5 times, each minute crawling slower than the last. I kept listening for the sound of the door, his boots, anything. But nothing came. Just me, the hum of the fridge, and the ache of realizing that sometimes the people you expect to save you don't. And maybe the cruelest part was that I still wanted him to come back, that it's strange how memory works. When you're in pain, your mind doesn't always comfort you. Sometimes it betrays you, digging up the sweetest moments just to twist the knife deeper. That's what those 30 minutes, and the silence that filled them, did to me. They unlocked a flood of memories, each one glowing with warmth I couldn't feel anymore. I thought about the afternoons when I was little, sitting in the passenger seat of his old car. The windows would be rolled down, warm air whipping my hair across my face, and he'd have one hand on the steering wheel while the other drummed on the side of the door in rhythm with whatever was on the radio. He never sang along. He wasn't that type, but sometimes I caught him humming. Back then, I thought he was the strongest man in the world. Untouchable. A fortress that I remembered the smell of charcoal and smoke on summer nights, the way he'd stand at the grill in the backyard, tongs in one hand, beer in the other. He'd call me over and let me flip a burger, pretending like I was in charge for a moment. I'd laugh, and he'd shake his head, muttering something about me burning the house down one day. It was teasing, but there was affection in it, a kind of closeness that made me feel like I belonged. Even the quieter moments came back. Like the time I got the flu and couldn't keep anything down. He'd sat at the edge of my bed, holding a glass of water I was too weak to drink, his hand on my back as I leaned forward to cough. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but just knowing he was there was enough. He was always there. That was the thing. He was always there. Until now. And now, those memories didn't comfort me. They mocked me. Each one replayed in my head, not as proof of love, but as evidence of how far away that version of him felt. It was like watching home videos of a stranger. I kept asking myself, where did that dad go? Did I imagine him? Or did something break along the way and I just didn't notice until now? The cruel part was how badly I wanted to step back into those memories, even though they hurt. I wanted to be that kid again, the one who thought a scraped knee was the worst pain in the world, and believed her dad would always make it better. But I wasn't that kid anymore, and the bruise under my eye was proof. The silence of the present made every flashback heavier, louder, like my brain was trying to remind me of what I'd lost. But instead of making me feel safe, it left me with this gnawing emptiness. Like nostalgia had turned into a weapon, and I was the target. The sound of the door opening again was so ordinary, but to me, it felt seismic. I had been sitting there so long, wrapped up in silence and memories, that the sharp click of the lock and the creak of the hinges made me jolt upright. My heart skipped, then raced, like I was bracing for an earthquake that I didn't move at first. I just listened. The footsteps came next, heavy, measured, and deliberate. The same boots that had carried him away 30 minutes earlier now echoed across the floor like they were dragging the weight of 1,000 unspoken words that I couldn't bring myself to look right away. My eyes fixed on the coffee table in front of me, the scratches on the wood, the chipped corner where I dropped a plate once as a kid. Anything to avoid the sight of him. But I felt his presence, thick and undeniable, filling the room the way silence had before. Finally, I lifted my gaze. There he was, standing in the doorway, holding something. A plastic bag, crumpled in his grip, edges translucent from whatever was inside. His expression was still unreadable, not soft, not angry, not anything I could name. Just set that. 30 minutes of absence had stretched me thin, made me raw, and now here he was, back again like nothing had happened. My mind was spinning. Why did he leave? Where did he go? Why now? I wanted to speak, to break the tension, to ask him a million questions all at once. But my throat locked up. My voice, when I finally found it, cracked like old wood. Dad? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he set the bag down on the counter, the plastic rustling loudly in the quiet room. Then he leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, staring at me with that same heavy look. And in that moment, something inside me split in two. On one side, there was the child in me, desperate for reassurance, aching to hear him say, "I'm here. You're safe. I won't let this happen again." On the other, there was the part of me that was furious, broken, screaming inside. How could you leave me? How could you see me like that and just walk away? The silence stretched again, but this time it was different. He was here now, and the weight of whatever was about to happen pressed down on me. My stomach twisted, my palms damp against my knees. I didn't know if I should cry, yell, or beg. And then, finally, he spoke. Just 2 words. 2 words I'll never forget. His voice broke the silence like glass shattering on the floor. Low, steady, almost too calm. He said, "Who did this?" 2 words. That's all. But they landed with the force of a thunderclap in my chest. For 30 minutes I had convinced myself he didn't care, that he had seen me broken and bruised and decided I wasn't worth the effort. And now here he was, standing in the doorway with a plastic bag at his feet, asking the question I'd been dying for him to ask, except it wasn't relief I felt. Not at first. It was confusion. My brain was still stuck on the moment he walked out, on the weight of that silence, on the echo of the door shutting behind him. Why now? Why not then? Why did he have to leave before he could even say this? I opened my mouth. but the words got stuck. My lips trembled, my throat tightened. All I managed was a choked sound that didn't resemble anything. He just watched. Me, eyes locked on mine, waiting. There was no softness in his gaze, but there wasn't coldness either. Just intensity. Who did this? He repeated, firmer this time. And for a second, I was 7 years old again, standing in front of him after breaking something in the kitchen, his voice heavy with authority, demanding an answer. But this wasn't about a broken dish. This was about me, my body, my pain, my humiliation. The bruise on my face wasn't something that could be glued back together. My chest tightened, tears welling again. It doesn't matter, I whispered, because in that moment, I honestly didn't know what I wanted more, for him to fight for me or for him to just sit down and hold me. He took a step closer, the floorboards creaking under his weight. I could see his jaw clench, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He wasn't satisfied with my answer. I asked you a question, he said, his voice lower, sharper now, and suddenly I was drowning in conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to scream at him. Where were you? Why did you leave? Why did you make me sit here thinking I didn't matter? But another part of me wanted to collapse into him, to let him take this pain and make it his problem, like he used to when I was a child. That's the cruel thing about love and anger. Sometimes they come tangled together, impossible to separate. I looked at him, eyes blurry with tears, and for the first time I saw not just my father, but a man. A man who didn't always have the right words, who sometimes walked away when he should have stayed, who was flawed and imperfect. But in that moment, he was also a man ready to fight, and I didn't know what to do with that. I don't even remember. What snapped first, his voice, my tears, or the silence between us? But something broke. Something deep and raw that had been clawing at me since the moment he walked out the door. That I shot up from the couch, my legs shaky but fueled by something I couldn't hold back anymore. Why did you leave? I blurted out, my voice cracking so hard it barely sounded like me. The words came tumbling out before I could stop them. You saw me. Like this. I gestured wildly at my face, at the swollen bruise that still throbbed. You saw me crying, and you just walked out. Do you have any idea what that felt like? He froze, his mouth opening, then closing again. No words. Just that heavy stare that was driving me insane. And it made me angrier. I thought you didn't care, I shouted, the tears finally spilling over, hot and relentless. I sat here for 30 minutes thinking I wasn't worth anything to you. Do you understand that? That silence, it was worse than this. I jabbed a finger at my black eye, my chest heaving. It was worse than the pain. My voice cracked again, this time breaking into sobs. I couldn't stop shaking. My knees buckled, and I sank back onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. All the anger, all the fear, all the shame, it came pouring out at once, like a dam giving way. Through the blur of tears, I heard him. His boots shifted against the floor as he stepped closer. For the first time, his voice wasn't firm, wasn't sharp. It was quiet, uneven. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I lifted my head, eyes burning, barely able to see him through the mess of tears. I left, he said slowly, because if I didn't, I was going to do something I couldn't take back. The weight of his words hit me hard. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for hours. I needed to think, to cool down. Because the second I saw you like that, all I wanted to do was find the person who hurt you, and his voice trailed off, fists clenching at his sides. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My tears slowed, my chest still aching from the outburst. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't before. His leaving wasn't about me being worthless. It was about him being human, flawed, struggling with his own storm. But that didn't erase the pain his absence had carved into me. And he knew it. He saw it in my face, in my trembling hands, in the way I couldn't look at him without flinching. From the memory of those 30 minutes, that was our breaking point. His and mine. The place where silence finally collided with truth, where pain and love crashed into each other in the ugliest, rawest way. And strangely, it felt like the first real conversation we'd ever had. After the shouting, after the tears, after the air between us had been ripped open, there was only exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones, heavy and unmovable. I sat there on the couch, my chest rising and falling unevenly. And for the first time in what felt like hours, I could actually hear myself breathe. He didn't try to come closer. He didn't try to touch me or fix me. He just stood there, arms crossed loosely now, like he'd dropped some invisible weight he'd been carrying. And I realized, maybe for the first time, that he wasn't the unshakable fortress I had always imagined. He was just a man who didn't always know what to do, who didn't always get it right, but who was trying, in his own flawed way, to be there. That it would have been easier if he had come back angry, or if he'd come back tender. Something extreme, something I could pin my feelings on. But instead, he came back human, complicated, messy, and that's harder to process than anything else. That I thought about those 30 minutes again, the way they stretched on, the silence, the loneliness. For me, it had felt like abandonment, like proof that I wasn't worth staying for. But hearing his side, seeing his clenched fists, his trembling jaw, I realized those 30 minutes meant something else for him. They weren't about leaving me behind. They were about holding himself back. And maybe that's what broke me most. Because all my life, I'd thought of him as someone who never faltered, someone who always had control. Seeing him as a man struggling not to lose it, wrestling with his anger, made him feel both closer and farther away at the same time. That in my mind kept circling back to one question. Can I forgive the silence? Because here's the thing, his explanation didn't erase the 30 minutes I spent sitting in that living room, convinced I was nothing to him. His words didn't erase the ache of abandonment, the sting of betrayal. But they did shift something. They cracked open a new understanding. I didn't know I needed. He had come back. He had asked. He had cared. Just imperfectly. And I guess that's the hardest truth I had to swallow. Sometimes love doesn't look the way you expect it to. Sometimes it's clumsy. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it walks out the door before it finds the strength to walk. Back in. I leaned back against the couch, wiping at my face with the sleeve of my shirt, exhausted and hollow but strangely lighter. I still hurt. God, I still hurt. But for the first time since that door had closed, I didn't feel completely alone in it. Time has a way of dulling bruises. The one on my face eventually faded. First purple, then yellow, then gone altogether, leaving nothing but clear skin behind. But the bruise inside me, that one lingers. It's quieter now, not as raw as it was in that moment. But it's still there, like an old scar that aches when the weather changes. I think a part of me will always remember those 30 minutes of silence. How abandoned I felt. How small. How certain I was that my dad didn't care. That memory clings to me, and I don't know if it will ever let go completely. But I'll also remember that he came back. That he asked the question that mattered. That in his own flawed, stumbling way, he chose to face me and himself instead of hiding. Our relationship didn't magically fix itself after that day. We didn't suddenly become the kind of father and child who hugged all the time or spilled our hearts over the dinner table. No, it was subtler than that. A nod that lasted a little longer. You okay? That sounded a little more genuine. Small shifts, but real ones. And maybe that's the closure I get. Not a fairy tale ending, not a perfect healing, but a kind of truth I can live with. My dad isn't invincible. He isn't always going to get it right. Sometimes he'll fail me. Sometimes I'll fail him. But that doesn't mean he doesn't care. It just means he's human. If I've learned anything from that day, it's this. Love doesn't always look the way we think it should. Sometimes it's loud and protective. Sometimes it's quiet and steady. And sometimes, painfully, it looks like silence before it looks like anything else. I wish he had stayed in the room with me. Of course. Do I still ache when I remember that moment? Absolutely. But I also know now that his silence wasn't the absence of love. It was the mess of it. And in its own broken way, that's something I carry with me. When I think back to that bruise, to the tears, to the silence and the return, I don't just see betrayal anymore. I see the complexity of what it means to love someone and to be loved in return, imperfectly, clumsily, but honestly, and maybe that's enough.